During the first national wave of sterilization laws, there was an effort in Virginia to get a law passed. In 1909, Dr. Carrington told a meeting of the Medical Society of Virginia that he intended to push the legislature to adopt the eugenic sterilization statute. A few months after Dr. Carrington's presentation, the Virginia legislature was considering a bill he had drawn up, based on the Indiana law, quote, to prevent procreation by confirmed criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists, unquote. The Medical Society of Virginia endorsed the bill, and Dr. Carrington personally lobbied for it, offering his scientific expertise to legislators who knew little about the subject. Dr. Carrington's bill failed, however, in the House of Delegates. The Virginia Medical Semi-Monthly reported that it ran into, quote, much blind sentiment, unquote, in the lower house among delegates who did not understand the issue. Dr. Carrington's bill was not introduced again. The next push for a eugenic sterilization law in Virginia came from a group that had been active in campaigns in other states, the superintendents of the state mental hospitals. Dr. Pretty, the superintendent of the colony for epileptics and feeble-minded, was a prominent member of the group of Virginia superintendents who emerged to promote eugenic sterilization, but he was not the first. That distinction belonged to Dr. Joseph S. DeJarnette, the superintendent of Western State Hospital. Dr. DeJarnette came from a family whose Virginia roots trace back to colonial times. His father was a Confederate Army captain, and he had an uncle who served in both the United States House of Representatives and its Confederate counterpart. His mother was a writer whose stories appeared in popular magazines, many of them written in the version of, quote, Negro dialect. Dr. DeJarnette had no doubt that his own high station in life was due, in large part, to what he considered to be his exalted lineage. Dr. DeJarnette graduated from the Medical College of Virginia in 1888 and then worked for a year at the Robert E. Lee Camp Confederate Soldiers' Home, a retirement home and a poorhouse for Civil War veterans. He then joined the staff of the Western Lunatic Asylum, which would later be renamed Western State Hospital, and quickly took to the work of ministering to the lunatics, developing a particular interest in the intersection of mental illness and criminality. A large and imposing man, Dr. DeJarnette was a stern authority figure at the asylum. He was also a moralist who opposed the use of alcohol. When he rose to superintendent, Dr. DeJarnette was a force of modernization and reform. He phased out the use of physical restraints and constantly sought out more modern approaches to therapy. Like many mental health reformers of his day, Dr. DeJarnette was drawn to the promise of eugenics. Writing in his hospital's annual report in 1908, he argued that it was important for Virginians' future to get rid of the defectives and weaklings. He argued the state legislature to enact a eugenic marriage law, as Connecticut and other states had. In the same annual report, he advocated eugenic sterilization. Dr. DeJarnette was the first state hospital superintendent in Virginia to endorse it, and he would later claim to have been the first person in Virginia to publicly call for it. He compared sterilization laws with the laws against spitting that were passed to prevent the spread of tuberculosis, which had also once been ridiculed, but came to be widely accepted. As a doctor, he insisted that the case for sterilization was simple. Quote, in the treatment of the diseases, it is an established fact that prevention is far better than the cure. Okay. Dr. DeJarnette became an outspoken advocate for eugenic sterilization legislation. He lectured to medical associations, spoke to elected officials and political groups, and made efforts to educate the general public. In his hospital's 1911 annual report, he repeated his call for eugenic sterilization, even in more emphatic terms. Quote, sterilization of the weakling should be legally required, he wrote. To make his case, Dr. DeJarnette even compared a pro-sterilization poem he was enormously proud of, quote, Mendel's Law, a plea for a better race of man, which he published in the Virginia Medical Monthly on 3 separate occasions. In it, Dr. Jarnett wrote, "O you wise men, take up the burden, and make this your loudest creed. Sterilize the misfits promptly, all not fit to breed." Alright. Dr. Jarnett may have not been the first Virginian superintendent to endorse eugenic sterilization, but it was Dr. Priddy, the superintendent of the colony for epileptics and feeble-minded, who ended up leading the campaign for it. Dr. Priddy would work with Dr. Jarnett to get Virginia to enact a sterilization law, and then Dr. Priddy became the driving force behind the legal campaign to defend the law. There was no cause in his life that Dr. Priddy fought for more passionately, and he would pursue it, quite literally, until his dying breath.